Breakeven is a section that lots of students don't like, so it's a good presentation to watch. We need to know the difference between variable and fixed costs. We need to be able to calculate them. We need to be able to construct a break-even chart and be able to work out the break-even point from it, and also be able to illustrate the margin of safety. And we've got to do some what-if analysis as well. So first of all, we need to look at fixed costs then. Fixed costs are costs that do not alter when the output is changed or output increases. So they're not directly linked to the production of the product. Rent and rates, which is like council tax for business, you know, it doesn't matter if you make one item or 100, the rent you're going to have to pay on your factory or office space is still going to be the same. The landlord or landlady doesn't take that into account. You know, if you say, oh, but I didn't make very much this month, they're not going to be like, oh, right, fine, I'll give you a discount. Whereas variable costs alter directly with the level of output. So they'd increase if you increase your level of output. So fuel costs and raw materials. So here are a few examples that my students came up with. So our interest charges on a loan are not going to change. Salaries are usually paid kind of based on a year, not paid yearly, but based on a yearly amount. Some people might not do. Oh gosh, I've just spilled a cup of coffee. Moral of the story, don't drink coffee at your desk. Anyway, you pay people on a salary on a yearly basis, but it's not based on their output, whereas wages, it's kind of hourly rate tends to be more based on kind of how much output you're producing. Raw materials as well. If you produce more, you're going to need more raw materials. Rent rate, loan repayments back down here. Whereas marketing might be semi-variable, we could say. Heating and lighting, possibly semi-variable. So some of them don't fit directly into one or the other. So let's have a look at an example. Here we go. So imagine that there's a business that produces hats. They have fixed costs that amount to £2,000 per month. The variable cost for producing each hat is £5 per unit. A little tip here, if you don't know if it's variable or not, if it says per unit or per hat or whatever, per product, that makes it variable. And then they sell them. The selling price is £10 per unit. So if we were looking at putting this on a graph, fixed costs, they don't vary with output if output's along the bottom there and costs are up the side. So fixed costs would stay completely horizontal, whereas a variable cost, they start at zero. If you produce nothing, you're not going to incur any variable costs, and they'd increase as output increases. So if they're both together, that's what they look like. And then total costs are just adding your variable costs and your fixed costs. So what it does is it kind of pivots this variable cost upwards. So the total cost is the green line, and it starts from 2,000, because that's, even if you produce nothing, you're going to have to still pay those fixed costs. So what is break-even? Well, break-even is looking at the level of output at which a business's sales generate just enough revenue to cover all of its costs of production. So at the break-even level of output, a business is not making a profit or a loss. They're just covering their costs. So you can calculate it three ways. So if we're using this example here of this business, we've got fixed cost 2,000, variable cost £5 per each, and hats £10 per each. And these are the figures that you get. So fixed costs would always be the same, no matter what the output level is, whereas variable costs are going to increase the more you produce. So it's just 100 times 5, 500. 200 times 5, 1,000. And if you produce nothing, you pay nothing. So 0 times 5, nothing. And then if you add those together, you get the total cost. And then revenue is just how many you're producing, and we're presuming that you're selling all of the products that you're producing, times the selling price, so 1,000, 2,000. And then the profit is just the revenue minus your total costs, and here we have a loss until you get to 400 units, and then after 400 units you start to make a profit. So our break-even output, therefore, is 400. Your other method of working out is the equation. So this is the equation: break-even output equals fixed cost divided by contribution per unit, and contribution per unit is just the selling price of one unit minus the variable costs of that unit. So if we put our numbers in, it's 2,000 divided by 10 minus 5, which is 5. So 2,000 divided by 5 equals 400. So we're getting the same figure. See, we should be getting the same figure, but we're getting the same figure that we got with the table method. And then lastly, you could use the graph to work it out. So you need 3 lines on your graph to be able to work out the break even. You need your fixed costs, you need your total cost, and you need your revenue. Technically, you could actually just get away with total cost and revenue, but we do add fixed costs on there. So here's my diagram. Up the side here, I've not written the label on, but you should write your label on your diagram. We've got costs / revenue, and along the bottom here we've got output. So, oh, there we go. There we go. I've written it on. So if we sell nothing, we make nothing. But if we sell 100 units times £10, which is the price, would mean that you make £1,000 worth of revenue, and so on and so on. And here's one I made earlier. So I've plotted that out and I've labelled it as revenue. Really important to label your curves. Okay, now I'm going to put on fixed costs. Now I know they don't vary and they're £2,000, so it's just going to be a horizontal line like this, and I've labelled it fixed costs. Then I'm going to put on total costs. Now that I know that it starts from this line here, and then I have to work out the variable costs. So at 100, it would be 100 times 5, which would be 500, so somewhere here. But I know I have to add 2,000 to that, so I know it's going to be 2,500. And you can keep on plotting these points until you get something like this, total costs. And where total costs and revenue intersect is where you get the break-even output. And below that level, that's the amount of loss you'd make if you made that amount of units, 100 say, the distance between the total cost and the revenue there is the amount of loss you'd be making. And then above here, this is the amount, it's not written very well, but that's the amount of profit that you'd be making, the distance between these two. Okay, now I do, you can plot out all of these points if you really want to, but I usually tell students to do it the cheat method, like the quick method. So if you get a question and it's asking you to draw out the graph, first thing you do, just do the equation to work out what the break-even output would actually be. So we've done the equation, say, and we've worked out that it's 400. Okay, so we go to our graph and we know that the break-even output is going to be somewhere along here. But then we can work out, if I just go back here, work out the break-even revenue. And the break-even revenue is just your break-even output that you've just worked out, your 400, times by the selling price. And if you do 400 times 10, it comes to £4,000. So we know the break-even revenue is going to be along that line there, and the break-even output is going to be along here. So where those two meet, plot those points, put a big X there. Now we know that revenue starts at 0, so you get your ruler out and you join those 2 points, 0 and that point, and it looks like that. And then we know that fixed costs are vertical, they're really easy, horizontal, they're really easy to put in. So there's the fixed costs. And then we know that total cost goes from that point there through this point. So get your ruler out again and join those together. And there you go, you've got a really quick break-even graph, and it takes you a lot less time than plotting it out. But if you're a little bit unsure about it, make sure you plot it out. Okay, so the margin of safety is just the difference between the current level of output that the business is producing and the break-even level of output. So if the firm is producing 450 hats and their break-even point is 400, in this example, the margin of safety is 50 hats. So they could lose 50 sales and still cover all their costs. So it's their margin of safety. Okay, let's look at a bit of what-if analysis. So what if, what's this diagram? What if we increase the price of the product? What would happen to the graph? Well, what happens is the revenue line becomes a lot steeper. So the break-even point would have been here at 400, and it reduces down to 200. So you have to sell 200 items to be able to break even if you increase the price, that is from £10 to £15. So it causes a pivot upwards. If we reduce the price of the product, you'd have to sell more of it, and you'd see that this revenue line would pivot downwards. If we increase fixed costs, everything sort of shifts upwards. So if it increases from £2,000 a month to £3,000 a month, we see the fixed cost line shift upwards. But also the total cost line shifts with that as well, because total costs include fixed costs, so we see a shift upwards. And what happens to the break-even output? Well, it was here, and now it's up here. So the break-even output actually increases. You have to sell more to break even and cover, well, it's logical, isn't it? If you've got higher costs, you've got to sell more to cover those costs. If fixed costs reduce, you get a shift downwards and your break-even point would reduce. And then if your variable costs increase, we get a pivot upwards. So we've got the variable costs have increased from £5 to £6 per unit in this example, and we've got the break-even output increasing from, it looks like 400 to 500 here because it's pivoted upwards. If variable costs reduce, it would pivot downwards. Okay, so that's your what if analysis. You can pause the slide or the screen at this point to kind of summarise this, or if you want to have a read through this. But the last part of break-even is looking at the advantages and disadvantages of break-even analysis. So I'll quickly just go through this. So it's actually quite, I know students don't like it, but it's actually quite a straightforward, simple technique that most entrepreneurs would be able to understand without having to use expensive kind of computer programming or someone that's got a PhD in maths. So it's quite good if you're a new business for working out, well, how many do I need to sell to cover my costs? And it's quite quick and it's quite visual, and you can use it to support applications for bank loans. And you can also do this what if analysis to see, well, what would the effect be? How many more would we need to sell? How many fewer would we need to sell? So you know, you can see all those kind of what if analysis. Those 2 points are both kind of very much what if analysis. However, it assumes that you're going to sell all of these products. Just because you say, oh, I only need to sell 5 to break even, doesn't mean you're actually going to sell 5. It depends on the product itself. It's also a real oversimplification of the real world. Usually businesses don't always sell every single product at the same price. They might give discounts to people that buy multiple products, or loyal customers, and variable costs don't always go up in a kind of straight line. They might be a little bit more curved for various reasons. And fixed costs as well can be a little bit more complex than that. Another disadvantage with break-even analysis is it's only as accurate as the data that you're basing it on. So say if you are a new business setting up, you won't necessarily know how much things are going to cost and how much you can expect to receive back in revenue and how many you are going to sell, that type of thing. So it makes the forecasting or the process of putting together a break-even chart quite challenging. So my best advice for this one is practice past paper questions and practice those essay questions as well, and look at the mark schemes as well, look at what they award marks for.